You see, the picture John paints for us of Jesus who appeared to him is utterly glorious and altogether overwhelming. John, when he sees this Jesus, falls on his face as though dead. And the question this morning is, why? Why is Jesus appearing to his friend John this way? John was his best friend on earth. In the Gospel of John, he refers to himself as the one that Jesus loved. So why, in the midst of his suffering, in the midst of his exile on the island of Patmos, in the midst of all of the hurting and all of the situations, why is it that Jesus is coming to John in this glorious form? You'd think he would come as a friend to give his friend a hug and to come alongside him to encourage him. You see, but the reality is that that's not what John or these churches needed. You see, they were facing situations and circumstances that were utterly overwhelming. In the coming decades, Christians would be hunted down and murdered relentlessly, ongoingly. They would face all kinds of persecution and hardships and false teaching from inside the church and from all over. They would be facing all kinds of things. And what they needed to see is a vision of a God who himself is utterly overwhelming. They needed a vision of a God who was bigger and stronger and more powerful than whatever it was that they were facing. A God in view of whom all other fears would be driven out. You see, over and over the Bible tells us about the goodness of fearing the Lord. Proverbs tells us that the fear of the Lord is indeed the beginning of wisdom, the beginning of right thinking and of right living. You see, and the problem is that we have trouble understanding that word fear because for us it just simply means to be afraid, to be scared of something. But that's not the whole picture. You see, in the original languages, the word for fear has overtones of awe and reverence and humble submission. Ultimately, that word fear in the Bible is getting at the idea of being overwhelmed by something to the point in which that is the thing that controls you. It's the thing which holds ultimate sway. See, and that's what John and these churches needed. And indeed, it is what you and I need as well. You see, the Jesus that John sees causes him to fall on his face as though he was dead, and yet Jesus comes to him in the midst of his fear. And he says, do not be afraid. See, that's the paradox of the Christian life, is it not? Right? It's learning to fear the right things so that you might not be afraid of everything else. Learning how to fear and at the same time to not be afraid. Learning how to let go of the wrong fear and to embrace the right kind of fear. You see, Jesus knew that what John and these churches needed was to see him not simply as their Savior and as their friend, but as the risen, ruling, reigning, triumphant, victorious Lord of all of history, the King of life, the King over death, the one who was indeed coming again to return to rule and reign and set all things right. And in showing himself to John this way and revealing himself to his churches this way, Jesus is not only telling them of his great power and authority, he's reminding them of his death on their behalf for them, which secures their hope. He's reminding them that Caesar is not in charge, that his kingdom is not the one in which will be brought about to fullness, that sickness and persecution and death and all those things do not hold the final word. He's speaking to his churches and his word is clear. He says, look at me. Look at my power. Look at my unquestionable control. Look at my love for you. Kevin DeYoung, I think, sums it up best when he says this way: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, not because God is terrifying to us, but because God is terrifying and he is for us. He is strong and mighty and glorious. And he is on our side. So we need not be afraid. You see, this unveiled Jesus is the one you and I must see. We must see him for who he really is.